Hi, everybody, and welcome to the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast Special Edition. Today, we're going to talk about draft strategies and some of the things that have just recently transpired out there in the baseball world that are affecting fantasy baseball managers out there. So, we're going to talk. Today is Saturday, just after midnight, actually. It's just now Saturday, March 18th. And right now we have 13 days to OFD. And if you've been listening, you know OFD is opening fucking day. So we got 13 days. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. We're getting down to where you need to really get in there and start drafting in leagues this weekend and over the next 2 weeks, right before. I mean, we're less than 2 weeks, but in the next 13 days, you need to get your leagues solidified on how many leagues you're going to play in and start getting in there and getting drafted. I've heard throughout the fantasy baseball world that, of course, just up front, one of the things that just recently happened with Edwin Diaz getting injured in the World Baseball Classic in their game against the Dominican Republic, where he was celebrating at the end of their victory, which was a huge victory, and he got hurt, and he's probably out for the year. So I've heard people say, well, that's the reason why I don't draft relief pitchers or closers early or whatever. And I would contend the argument from my perspective is what the significance of Edwin Diaz's injury that is possibly season ending is the reason why I suggest, especially to people who are starting out in fantasy baseball and intermediate players, but even I take this advice. I have not drafted in one league yet. The reason why I don't do that is things like that happen, more so on players who the visibility, the clarity with which prospects and some of these up-and-comers, people I call risers that we're going to talk about in a minute, whether they're going to make that roster or not. That changes the condition a lot about prospects at those later rounds when you're drafting in your very late rounds. And knowing the information and understanding whether those guys are going to make those rosters are really, really important. So we'll talk about that. A couple things on the calendar. Again, 13 days to OFD. 13 days to OFD. If you can't get excited about that shit, you need to hang it up. I'm telling you, it's exciting times out there, folks, for all you fancy baseball freaks. But you guys need, if you want to be a badass this year, get in the BadAzz community and start joining in on some of our live streams. We will live stream every Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Time. So that's your chance. Come on, say hey, take part in some of the discussion, and I'll include you. Throw questions my way and have an opportunity to win some kick-ass baseball cards that we'll talk about. But that's every Sunday, 7 p.m. Central Time. Some people call it Tulsa time. Living on Tulsa time. Okay, living on Tulsa. Anyway, opening day again, 13 days. One of the big dates coming up, March 26th. That is a Sunday evening. That's actually a week from Sunday. A week from Sunday night, we're going to hold our very first BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast League. 12-team Yahoo Standard League head-to-head categories league. You can go to our website at www.badazzsports.com. BadAzz with two Z's instead of two S's, obviously. That's www.badazzsports.com. You go there, there's a link there to join our podcast league. So please go out there and join up, and we'll get that league full, and we'll draft next Sunday evening, 7 p.m. Central Time. You'll be a part of the podcast in that podcast draft on our live stream, shooting out through YouTube and on audio platforms, Apple Podcast and Spotify Podcast, or Spotify as well. One other note, admin note, you can reach out to me on Twitter or follow me out there at roto_Rudy. That's ROTO_RUDY. All right. I've said before about my basic premise about injuries, and we're going to talk about injuries first and how to address this with some strategies and things that have happened recently with respect to Edwin Diaz, basically. But my basic ideas on injuries at this stage, when you're looking at preseason drafting and you're getting ready to draft for your league, I hear it throughout the industry. I've said this before. This syndrome called if healthy. The syndrome of if healthy. I hear it all the fucking time. Stop, would you? You're either not injured, or you're coming back off an injury. That's it. This if injured stuff, we do this to ourselves, I think, when we talk about this if injured, to talk ourselves into bad choices. It's like, that babe looks hot down there, but I really should be leaving. I got to work tomorrow. It's just dangling there like fruit. The if healthy thing has led many of fantasy managers down the path of taking her home and having regrets. So there's basically three conditions. At least that's my perspective. And of course, we can't avoid injuries throughout the season. We'll talk about that throughout the season. It will have an effect on you in your leagues as a fantasy manager. Now, it happens. It's part of it. It's just like part of the reality the game itself. So you may not be able to avoid those injuries. Those are out of your control. But you can recognize things preseason and prior to your draft that can help you avoid situations where the likelihood that you'll have to deal with injuries early in the season versus trying to reduce or mitigate, as some fancy-ass people say, mitigate those injury risk, so to speak. I do believe in that. I believe it's, don't talk yourself into to having regrets. Because player projections throughout the industry, wherever you use them to get your rankings of players, as we've spoken about before in my BadAzz learning sessions that are posted on our website and on our other on our audio and video feeds that we spoke about earlier. But projections generally reflect median outcomes. Injuries aren't usually, as far as I'm aware of, in analyzing and establishing the algorithms that they come up with to statistically formulate, whatever their projections and outcomes are. And because injuries really aren't factored into that, that's a big part of the human element in fantasy baseball as a fantasy baseball general manager and bench manager. You remember you're serving two roles. So there's no number wizardry out there that I'm aware of that can adequately project injury risk. Maybe there's some insurance companies you could call up that do these sports athletes. I don't know if they'd ever release it, but they probably got the best information on that, just like Vegas has the best information on general outcomes of games and sports. So anyway, so we're starting at a median and then deal with these other conditional things within building your roster. As I said before, other factors. You can even throw in other factors as injuries prior to the season as part of your other factors. I put that in my other factors every year. So what do we know when we build a projection, a board, a draft board, a war board, a sheet, whatever you call it, that's going to be something that you go by when you go into that draft room and do your for real draft. When you have that down pat, if you have another factor where you put your considerations with injuries, then you can look back at players last year that missed significant amount of games and due to injury, and you can assess, with some really easy reference information. It's actually right in Yahoo. I mean, fantasy. If there's injury, generally when players are coming back from injuries, Yahoo Fantasy has pretty good player profile information, and it's certainly up to date. And they keep it up to date. So if you have some significant player concerns about injury, you should be tracking that on whatever your war board is, to whatever level of concern you want to place on injuries. Previous season injuries can be factors for my consideration for making a player a serious target or not. So making those decisions as part of my other factors and ranking, making bumps, slight marginal movements throughout my tiers list. I will do that based on previous injury. If there's some amount of risk and the player has not proven it, has not been back on the field during gameplay action and played at a previous level that he has played at, I think that's where you still tag them with that injury tag until they perform at or above the level prior to the injury. I mean, that's pretty simple. I think a great example is Ronald Acuna Jr. I think whereas he came back last year and he played, he certainly, by any analysis, was lacking in power. He still ran bases. He hit the ball hard, but certainly suffered in the home run category. And he's aware of that, and news reports are that he's working on that, but that's probably still part of that recovery from that serious knee injury he had in 21? Yeah. So there's a lot to that, and as with any injury, and I've always said, hey, I'm not a doctor, I will say this is a good time of the year to lean on what I've called before as my analytics team. As the fantasy general manager and manager of my team, I can't do this alone. I don't think you can either. Maybe you can. Hey, you're a badass then. If you are that badass, follow me. Say, hey, I'm I'm already a badass. Well, then one, join my league. Join the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast League. Go to the website, register. We'll get you signed up in the league. And then if you beat me head to head, whatever week we play, I will send you one of these badass shirts right here. Let me show you. There you go. With the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball logo, and it says on it, "Be a badass" with two Z's. We don't want to offend Grandma, so anyway. I hope you guys are having a good time out there doing mock drafts. I mean, I did want to tell you this is just really fun time for fantasy baseball. So I'm gonna grab a drink here. It's probably not professional, but I didn't go to Syracuse to study broadcast journalism or something. Remember, I told you that. I have a production team of 3 people: me, myself, and I. I don't even have somebody to bring me a water. I just got to close the door and hope nothing's happening outside of it. Okay. So lean on your analytics team right now. Uh, if you missed the last special edition, we talked about my analytics department being like the podcast that I listen to, CBS Fantasy Baseball. I think is it called Fantasy Baseball Today? But CBS, Frank, Scott, and all those folks are just great out there. Very helpful information. The fantasy pros over there, Joey P. and the Welsh, very helpful information. You will not, if you listen into that daily and just catch those guys and listen to their episodes, you'll stay abreast on injuries. You won't miss out on any. But if you don't have time to do that on a daily routine, then you can still pull some of that information, obviously, from the internet. And there's a million sites and things that can track injuries, give you notifications. You can go on MLB.com and you can set up notifications for one of the categories as injuries. I would suggest that'd be a good one for some official information. You can obviously use Twitter and get notices on injuries as well. So there's a wealth of ways to incorporate what I call your analytics department. But and that's one. Another one I'd throw in there is like the MLB network, the TV network. They obviously stay abreast on news from teams. So I suggest to incorporate them into your what I call analytics department. So anyway, this is a great time of year to lean on them and stay abreast of injuries so that you can make decisions on your, not only this, we're in a part of the year, obviously, where you're going to lean on that analytical information, or especially with respect to injuries, because I don't have time to go run all that stuff down. And I don't think you do either. But you can listen to it and stay abreast from people who do this for a living and go out there and get that information and bring it to us. Because we love to play and we love to have fun, kick ass, and be badasses, right? So I did want to tell you that not only prior to the season, how important it is to understand the effects of some injuries, maybe people coming back from injuries, people getting new injuries, what have you. It's not only important to get that right now prior to your draft, but certainly if you've already had your drafts, and again, remember that BadAzz Fantasy Baseball typically talks about as its foundation of discussion 12-team standard head-to-head leagues, and primarily in the Yahoo platform, but applicable across CBS, ESPN, and other fantasy baseball platforms as well. But keeping that in mind in the standard format, how important it is also for once you're in a league, like right now, let's say you drafted last week or a couple of days ago or whatever, but you have drafts that you've already completed. When you hear about injury information that is especially to closers, that it's very important to get that information and then know how to transition. Even right now, if you're in a league and you drafted Edwin Diaz, first of all, don't freak out. It was a terrible injury. It's a terrible blow to fantasy managers who would draft him. He certainly was on a targeted list for me as well. So, and I've heard a few discussions about the effect, the Edwin Diaz effect. And I will just say this. Edwin Diaz becoming injured was a big deal because of the scarcity of individual relief pitchers in the major leagues that you can expect to get 30-plus saves a year. I'd venture to say 10 years ago there was twice as many people with that projected number. I don't know that, so don't go checking it and say, no, you're wrong on that. But just in general, you know what I mean? So I'll get with my analytics department on that. But my point basically is that relief pitchers that have established roles currently that you can count on projecting them 30-plus saves. We just lost one off the draft board, more than likely, with Edwin Diaz. If you consider there's probably only 4 or 5 on the entire draft board that go into the season with that kind of area of projection, 4 or 5. One of them was Liam Hendriks. He's already off the board. And now that Edwin Diaz is injured and the focus certainly is on him, we might forget that Liam Hendriks was one of the 3 best relievers in baseball. Now, he'll be coming back from his bout with cancer. I'm not sure what the prospectus is on when he'll be back, how effective he'll be when he gets back. That's a whole nother discussion. But my point is, with injuries and its effect prior to the season on your draft strategy, is that we lost one early with Liam Hendriks, his availability, and now Edwin Diaz. If there was only 4 or 5 to begin with, there's only 2 or 3 now. It's been widely reported through Fantasy Baseball Podcast how, and statistically they've discussed this, is how the spread of saves has been more broadly spread out throughout various relievers in the major leagues during the season. So we're having less and less of these high save closers. And there's so many factors and reasons, and we'll talk about that in season. And it varies from team to team too. So there's more factors to relief pitchers in the closer role than we have time to discuss, because that would be a whole special edition in itself, and we'll talk about that more in season. Right now we want to focus on how that's affecting the draft. I will tell you this. If you have 1/4 or 1/5 of something that's just left the equation with respect to draft rankings and value and everything, supply and demand, what have you, then what's that do to the value of those 2 or 3 people that are left? In my judgment is it's went way up. How much I don't know, but I do. At least I'm factoring this in my draft strategies, and you should too. If part of your draft strategy is to draft a high, your number one, your RP1, your relief pitcher number one, your draft strategy plans were to get one of those 4 or 5, or if that was your target plan, was to try to get one of those. That sure was mine. Well, we've lost one of those, so that's a significant decrease. I suspect over the next week and a half, that that the likes of Emmanuel Clase, Josh Hader, Jordan Romano, probably Devin Williams even, I think just on down the line, I think a lot of these relievers are going to move up. And don't let that catch you off guard. Be prepared for that. Look at the relief pitchers that are now on your draft board in that order from the top down, and look at who you were targeting. If you intended to really get one of those top tier relievers, start adjusting your tiers list or your draft board, and arbitrarily, this is my suggestion, arbitrarily move those top relievers up a tier. And that's the cost of doing business, I think, if you're really going to be, if you're going to achieve that strategic goal with respect to relievers this year. You're going to have to get in the game early and expend early, or you. The other alternative is this, and I hear this from fantasy baseball pros out there. And again, everybody has a strategy, and I'm not down on anybody's strategy. I think that from my experience and my playing, is I'd never enjoyed the teams and had fun with teams that I was chasing those saves and chasing stolen bases all year. I just didn't. And what I mean by that, if you don't know what chasing pitchers during the season, it means you didn't draft, either didn't, you planned on not prioritizing a position, or just the way the draft flowed, or whatever happened, the end result was you're very weak in relief pitchers, closers, and being able to compete in saves. So, but a lot of people will say, well, I'll just pick them up during the year because it changes radically like throughout the year. And that's very true. For about a third of the league, maybe even 2/3, I mean, to an extreme, there's a lot of volatility. So to me, it makes sense, unless you want to chase these committees and these injuries, and then just teams that just have weak relievers and they just don't have that person to solidify the closing row. If that only is reflected in a third of the MLB teams, kind of traditional closers, it's another reason to me to heighten the priority with which you draft a reliever this year. Actually, your relief pitcher 1 and your relief pitcher 2. You want to make sure you have some priority, and we're going to talk about that in specifics here momentarily. Okay, so we're going to break away to the screen here, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you something here. Okay. Oops, that's the wrong one. We need to get on the other one. Is that it? That's not it. Is this it? Okay, here we go. Okay. For you folks at home who are listening this on audio, I'll try to be reminded of that. Sometimes I completely forget that I'm actually, that people are listening just audio, and I got to remember to explain some things that I'm doing. But right now, what is on the screen and what I'm showing you is just a simple sheet in numbers in Apple. It's an Apple app similar to an Excel spreadsheet, and it just lists relief pitchers, and I've put some priority on, and I just wanted to discuss this effect again on relief pitchers and closers and such. This is a list I come up of targeted people, relievers that I think highly of to target, and these guys can range anywhere from, round, like Edwin Diaz was going in like round 3, so it could be anywhere from round 3, certainly, and maybe as low as you start talking about, maybe not Duran, move him up here, but Kendall Graveman as low as maybe 16, 17, 18th round, somewhere down through there. But I've highlighted people throughout the draft, but these guys, I assure you, are going to go up further. I mean, you take Clase and Josh Hader, if you want them in the drafts in the next 2 weeks before the season, you're probably going to have to pay a third round to get them. Raisel Iglesias of the Atlanta Braves. The big thing about all these first few guys is they're all on very good teams, have lots of opportunities for saves, and you can project them in the high 20s, and certainly Class A and a plus 30. And then Presley here with the Astros, and Helsley and Doval. And you start getting in this area with Doval where you might, Camilo Doval of San Francisco being that level of relief pitcher too that you might want. Again, his value is going to go up before you could probably get him in round. I'd have to look it up, but in the maybe 9th round, 10th round, that's probably going to be a 7th or 8th now to get someone like that. So anyway, these are some of the, if you can, check out this list, you can see are some people that I highly suggest you look over and consider drafting them, and then look at what their ADP is now, like today or tomorrow, and then watch it over the next week or so. If your draft isn't till next week sometime, check out how that goes, whether you see their ADP rising above the rankings that they previously were. And I think you're going to see that. I think you'll see Felix Bautista, all these guys going up. Kenley Jansen. I think what hurt him in my eyes was going to Boston, but maybe not as much now. Now there's one less guy. You have Devin Williams, obviously, as a solid closer role at Milwaukee. Alexis Diaz is an interesting guy I'd like to draft, but he's been moving up quite a bit over the last couple weeks. So hopefully that'll stay down around where he was. I think around 14 or something like that. Anyway, the drawback on him, and by the way, he's the brother of Edwin Diaz, so they look very similar, and they actually pitch very kind of similar. They have kind of a similar wind up and delivery, kind of, in a way. I'm not an expert, but just my eyes, it looks similar. I think the downer with him is I really like his skills and stuff and what he can do, but being on the Cincinnati Reds, got to factor in too, and that's why his ADP isn't up there with, Rizal Iglesias or certainly Camilo Duvall, somebody like that, is because he's on a team that's going to get maybe half as many save opportunities. So another interesting one I would like to highlight is put on your target list or look at Jose Leclerc of Texas. I think Texas is going to be better this year. I think they'll have more wins, and I think that will translate into more save opportunities. I don't think Jose Leclerc is necessarily a rock-solid lock at Texas to maintain the closer role, but I think he's going to serve in that closer role to begin with. And I think he's worth the risk at a very low. You can get him in the very late rounds. But again, he's going to be creeping up as well. Andres Munoz of Seattle, a great choice, even though he's one that I can see is not been committed to by his team, the Seattle Mariners. They kind of do this flip-flop with Paul Sewald. Both excellent relievers. This is another reason why I wanted to draw on why Edwin Diaz, but it also, his injury kind of boosted this discussion. And that's why I'm talking about it now. But let me get off of the screen here real quick. So this is my point about relievers too. If you choose, and it's okay if you choose this strategy not to prioritize relievers, wait till later and just pick up some relievers, what have you, and figure it out during the season as the closer roles invariably will change a lot during the season. You just run the risk of dealing with just, again, like bowels of the relief pitching world. And the danger in that, I have learned in past experience, is you might get a save now and then by some of these real bottom feeders that are closers for maybe like the Oakland A's. Sorry, A's fans, but hey, your team sucks. It just does. It sucks. It's going to suck this year. Pittsburgh Pirates, you're going to suck. You just suck. Teams like that suck, even if they have a closer, you might want to consider not playing in those waters, because what happens to you is you might get a save now and then, but you're also going to get them blown saves that run your ERA and your WHIP for the rest of your two categories. So you're trying to get a save, one category, and you got this guy that goes in there and gets you a save every now and then gives up a 3-run homer in a third or 2/3 of an inning and blows two categories for you. That's why I don't like to wade in those waters as much, and that's why I prioritize some relievers early, and I spend quite a bit of emphasis and priority in making sure that I get a top-tier reliever, a mid-tier reliever, and then I'll do a speculative pick for a relief, my third relief pitcher in later rounds. I'm not even worried about, honestly, if I get one during the draft. The main thing I focus on is making sure, because I usually stick pretty much to a 3 relief pitcher roster, 3 relief pitchers to compete in saves. I used to go to 4, and that's because I was doing the bottom feeders and just trying to pluck people off as people got injured or lost their jobs on crappy, shitty teams. And it was frustrating. So my strategy today is much different. Your relief pitcher 1, relief pitcher 2, put some priority on them. Look for rounds 3 and then rounds 6 or 7 to pick up round 3 to 5 at the latest to pick up your relief pitcher 1, and 6, 7, maybe 8th round for your relief pitcher 2. Put some priority on it. You won't regret it, and you won't be wading in the shitty waters, the muddy ass waters that will be called the closer fucking carousel that always is with fantasy baseball. It really is. Okay. So I did want to talk about also on baseball strategies. I think it's really important to talk about, and it's going to give excitement to your roster and playing, is trying to look at risers. I call them risers. A lot of people call them in the business, they're looking for like upside. They're looking for breakout players, players that are on the move, so to speak. It's just the talk is positive that the whatever that trend is, however steep that rise is, it's still a rise. So I call them risers. I like to identify risers as part of my other factors in developing my draft strategy. And it's really important because we'll talk about more important exactly why it has some real importance throughout the season, is to find and try to identify those folks that can make a serious leap from their preseason rank to their end of season performance. Risers to me are people who are early in their careers, typically. I mean, I'm not going to have you won't see Johnny Cueto on the risers. No offense. Last year he was kind of a riser in a way. I mean, he pretty much, reclaimed an MLB slot when I sure thought that was over. But risers are typically younger folks that are coming up, and typically they've already played some. Maybe they played part of their rookie year at the end of the season, the previous season, but they're typically not. But there are a few exceptions where they're players who have no MLB experience. When we have people like that on the list, they're going to be rising. And last year, for instance, risers that had not played the major leagues were players that are certainly on the riser list this year, and very indicative in the drafts right now in the ADPs when you talk about players like Bobby Witt Jr., when you talk about Michael Harris, when you talk about Gunnar Henderson, and folks like that who will certainly be on the riser list this year, even though they got some playing time last year and already showed some of what they can do. Now, nobody out there is Nostradamus, and I've said this before, in projecting what someone we perceive with upside or a future, a riser. The further out you do that projection, just as common sense, I think the more you'll find statistically those projections are less accurate, or not accurate, but they just don't turn out nearly as close as nearer term. And that's why I don't deal with too far out, because I don't care what kind of prognosticator you are, how good you are at stuff. The further out it is, it just honestly in a 12-team standard league has no relevance. If you're in a dynasty league and these leagues that rely heavily on prospects through minor league drafting and minor league inclusion into their dynasty leagues, then that's a whole different story. But what we're talking about, we're looking for risers that we already know, for the most part, they're going to be good. But how good? What that variance or that difference is going to be between their preseason rank and their end of season rank. You need to get some of these players on your board and you need to focus. We're going to pull that list up here, and I'm going to show you some guys, folks that I'm talking about here. So we're going to go to, okay, right here. Now, I will tell you at the start, just to begin with, when you look at the top of this list, because it's pretty much weighted on who's already ranked highly, by their player ranks or their ADPs. So there's no news when you're talking about risers that these guys in this darker shade, the darker shade of yellow here, like Julio, starting with Julio Rodriguez and ending with Alek Manoah. There's no surprise here. These guys are all risers. But I believe that their rising is still going. Their rise and their incline in their careers is shooting out. And, of course, it's reflecting in when they're going in the drafts. They're going up there high, but still. I mean, you've got a lot of people that are calling out Michael Harris, saying that, he's going to be a bust. No. Ronald Acuna, no. None of these guys bust. None. These are risers that have already risen and are going to keep rising. And I target them in my drafts, and I highly suggest that you target them heavily in your drafts and prioritize players like this that are on the rise. Kyle Tucker, another one, Emmanuel Clase, and that's even more so now that Edwin Diaz is out. This lighter color are just people who have not done it yet. But, as I'll talk about in a minute, these are the folks that are going to get drafted in some respects lower. Now, this doesn't pertain to Bobby Witt Jr., O'Neal Cruz, and basically, we can throw Gunnar Henderson in there because they're going at the 8th round or higher already. But I still have them on a riser list because I still have faith that their performance is still going to exceed their draft position. But again, the margins seem a little bit smaller at the top, a little bigger here in this 3 area. Now, where the area of risers to me where you can make these significant leaps on your team are younger risers that come later in the rounds, like Jake McCarthy, although he's been trending up. Taylor Ward, Vinny Pasquantino, Corbin Carroll, of course, his name's been around, and Miguel Vargas over and over. Alexis Diaz, we talked about him, a reliever from Cincinnati, closer. George Kirby, Hunter Green, Grayson Rodriguez, Jordan Walker, Anthony Volpe, Edward Cabrera, C.J. Abrams, Christopher Morel, and Logan O'Hoppe. Now, I wanted to go back to some names that if you followed baseball last year but are just new to kind of jumping back into it this year, a few names that you haven't heard of. And, of course, Grayson Rodriguez was somebody that was highly thought of last year and one of the top prospects in all of Major League Baseball, and didn't get to come up to the Baltimore Orioles because of an injury of I can't remember what it was, and then he did have some kind of minor setback, I believe, in spring training already, but I think he's okay and he's good to go. But I think there's someone that has not. All these other people above the line here that we talked about have done something in the major leagues, and that's why they've taken somewhat of a leap in their draft positions too. But now some of these folks down here, we have a chance, I believe, to have that deviation, that difference between where you're going to draft these guys and where these players are going to end up, which I think I think they're going to perform well above their ADP, their average draft position for you newbies. But these players are names that you want to get on your list. Players that have never played in the major leagues, like Grayson Rodriguez, yeah, they're risky. Jordan Walker, yeah, risky. Anthony Volpe, also risky. And then we have Logan O'Hoppe down here, who's competing for the catcher position at the Los Angeles Angels with Max Stassi. So more to follow. And if he gets that position, of course, that'll increase his value significantly. But some of these other players here that have never played, like Jordan Walker's got a lot of hype. And there's a reason why he's getting a lot of hype, because he's an awesome player. But he's yet to play in a major league game. So, again, a lot of risk with that. If you don't believe that, then let me throw out a name for some of y'all that played fantasy baseball in previous years, like Carter Keyboom. Remember him? People will say these guys and bring them up and say, oh, my gosh, it's going to be the greatest thing ever. And they sometimes they just don't. They don't make the transition. But if they made my list here, they've passed the eye test. I believe Jordan Walker is going to make the opening day roster. I believe Anthony Volpe is going to make the opening day roster. And I believe you should draft them accordingly as if they are going to make that roster. These two here are those wild cards. Of course, Jordan Walker's climbed significantly over the last few weeks. So I can't recall his. Let me see what tier. Let me check just real quick here where he's showing up. I think he's moved up since whenever I tracked it. So Jordan Walker was showing up. Well, he's further down than I thought. Okay, now I'm not sure what the heck happened to him. Where are you two? There he is. Well, it looks like he's in that 205 to 216 range, which would show up in my 18th tier. I believe that's going to go up. I don't know if that injury, I think that was a minor injury, though, but I don't think that had an effect. But certainly Anthony Volpe, I think he's going to make the opening day roster, because I just think at some point, even if the franchise New York Yankees want to send him, keep him down in minor leagues, and I don't know if to play some kind of arbitration games, eligibility or whatever, I guess they can do that. But I think sometimes some people are so talented that that they have to bring them up. And I think in this case, those two are going to come up. Let's say you draft them in those late rounds, 18, 19, Volpe maybe even in the last round, 22, 23, something like that. Let's say they get sent down, don't even make the opening day roster. You haven't really lost a thing. You can go on the waiver wire and see who's hitting good early, and just catch, some lightning in a bottle, somebody getting off to a good start during the baseball season, and you'll be fine. But if you draft them and get them on your roster and they make that team and they break out like scouts, and the word is on the street that they're gonna tear the cover off baseballs, I would want them on my team. And sometimes those are the kind of moves that can win you championships. But oftentimes the ones that'll win you some are right in here where we were talking about, like from Jake McCarthy this year to all the way down here to Christopher Morel. In my opinion, these are guys that can break out. They're already risers, and they could really have those super years that can make the difference between you just competing and winning a ring in your league. Okay, I want to tell you just a few things to support what I'm talking about as far as trying to find these risers and drafting them heavy in your middle to late rounds. Hold on here. Because that's what can make the difference in winning and losing. And for instance, part of my review at the end of the previous season, the 2022 season. At the end of last season, I did some reviews of my team and basically the performance overall of players during the fantasy season while it's fresh on my mind. And I certainly, if you plan to play season after season in fantasy baseball, I highly suggest that you do this right at the end of the season while everything's fresh on your mind. Is either write it down or put it in a phone or your computer or whatever, notes and just things, assessments, however you want to do it in assessing what happened that season. And it'll be very helpful next year when you open that up for the next season. In this case, I took last season at the end of the year and I looked at players. First of all, who were the top players? Who were the top fantasy players of the previous year? And I would break them down into hitters, pitchers, starting pitchers, and relief pitchers. And I mean, it's very clear that, let me see what the number was. I think it was, sorry, I had to flip the page here. I'm old school. I had to actually flip. Of the top fantasy rankings every year, 8 of the 10 top fantasy players last year in Yahoo Fantasy, they were hitters. 8 out of 10 of the top fantasy players were hitters. 13 of the top fantasy players, 13 of the top, in the top 20, 13 were hitters. So, and for the most part, when you look down the list, the top 20 hitters or so, there were no surprises really. Meaning these were people that were, for the most part, projected to be on top of the league. Out of the top 15 starting pitchers / relief pitchers, meaning including all these pitchers last season, only 3 were surprises, meaning that had cracked into that top 15. And we're talking about top 15 overall, hitters and pitchers, top 15 performers that were starting pitchers and relief pitchers. There were only 3 that I considered like were not on that, being drafted anywhere near being that highly ranked at the end of the year, and that is Tony Gonsolin of the Los Angeles Dodgers, Christian Javier of the Houston Astros, and Nestor Cortez of the New York Yankees. All the other pitchers that were on that list were projected to do well or high. So what I want to tell you too is consistently year over year, these high top tier performers consistently perform at those high levels. And that's why they get drafted, early in those early rounds. But the differences in the margins, in my opinion, meaning from where you draft a player to where that player ends up performing at the end of the year, those differences and those margins are greater and therefore more important to your championship aspirations. So you take, and I took a sample of batters from last season. These were the best performers last season, best fantasy performers, based on a standard format, 12-team, 5x5 category rankings. The differential in the preseason ranking and the end of season rank was significant. I looked for players that were in the top of their performance level, in the top 100, of which, so for hitters, I took players that finished the season in the top 100 of all fantasy players, pitchers, batters, everybody. And I found 13 hitters that I identified had serious deviations in a positive way, meaning their preseason ranking was X, their end of season ranking was Y, and that was a big difference. The average draft rank for these 13 hitters was 205. So these 13 players identified were ranked preseason 205 on average. Their average end of season rank, the average end of season rank of those 13 players was 55. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the more of those guys that you got on your team, and you don't have significant injuries throughout the year, which you can't do anything about, so you draft that top part of your draft knowing that those people, generally those players, are going to perform at a high level. On average, there's a greater chance. But it's in that other group of people, finding those people that can make the difference in the jump from their preseason rank to their end of season. In this case, those 13 hitters, any number of those hitters that you could have had on your roster last year would have significantly helped you win a championship. By the way, those 13 hitters were the following, and these were definitely positives to have on your team: Kyle Schwarber, Shohei Ohtani, Dansby Swanson, Adolis Garcia, Julio Rodriguez, Christian Walker, Anthony Rizzo, Brandon Nimmo, Eugenio Suarez, Andres Jimenez, Anthony Santander, Brandon Drury, and Dalton Varsho. That rounds out the 13 players that averaged 205 average rank at draft time preseason and finished an average of 55th in the entire fantasy league play. I think one of the great extremes, most extreme, or one of the more extremes, was Andres Jimenez of the Cleveland Indians. Preseason ranked at 294, finished 78th overall. Another exceptional year was Brandon Nimmo. Of course, he was in a contract year. Ka-ching, ka-ching. Show me the money, Brandon Nimmo. Oh, man. Because he was preseason ranked 254, and he finished 74th. That was a super year. Again, there's many examples, but that should tell you, I mean, these are the guys, these are the people we're hoping that I was talking about previously on that list of people I'm targeting to make those leaps. I'm hoping to get 2 or 3 of those 13 that were on that list last year. Because if you get 2 or 3 of them off that list like that on this year, you're going to win some championships, I believe. Now, on the pitching side, I took 16 pitchers who finished in the top 100. They actually finished, the lowest was 96. And then there was actually quite a gap. So actually it went to 65th after that. So we're basically dealing with really some of our that finished in a top 70 overall in all fantasy, these pitchers. So there were 16 of those that I selected and that finished again in the top 100. Their average preseason rank was 190. 190. At the end of season, their average rank was 40. Again, it don't take a rocket scientist to figure out that shit makes a difference. So these 16 players were very helpful to a lot of people to win championships. Those pitchers were Alek Manoah, Emmanuel Clase, Zach Gallen, Tony Gonsolin, Dylan Cease, Ryan Helsley, Yu Darvish, nasty Nestor Cortez. He had a hell of a year. Christian Javier, Tyler Anderson, Spencer Strider, Tristan McKenzie. Is it Daniel Bard? Yeah. Framber Valdez, Scott Barlow, the Kansas City Royal, Scott Barlow, and Felix Bautista. Those pitchers are the pitchers that made that big leap in fantasy last year. Again, they drafted on average in the 190 range. The 190 range. We're talking these guys on average were being drafted, and again, on average, the 17th round. 17th round. Of course, Alek Manoah was drafted higher. I mean, he was one of the higher ones on this list. He was preseason, for instance, Alek Manoah, the starting pitcher for the Toronto Blue Jays. So 81 put him being drafted around the 7th round last year. So very similarly to the group of people we're talking about as risers this year, you have to find those people and make sure you draft them to have a shot at getting that bump, that benefit. Because if you wait and they end up on a waiver wire, so to speak, or whatever, by the time they get hot and people realize they're good, they'll be snagged up for free by somebody on the waiver wire. So anyway, that draft pick would have took Alek Manoah around round 7, and he finished 14th overall. So that was a huge draft. Same with Emmanuel Clase. He was preseason projected last year at 86 and finished 18. Those are just ridiculous. Zach Gallen, 161 preseason, finished 20th. I mean, Tony Gonsolin, preseason 80th ranked and finished 22. Dylan Cease, 84 and 25. You get the point? Just those were huge years. And those are what championships are made of in fantasy baseball, I assure you. So I wanted to cover that stuff because it's so important right now with drafting. People are commencing their drafts, or you're getting ready to join a draft. Remember, you can join private leagues by invite. So if you have friends out there that have leagues, go hit them up. Get those. You can even start your own leagues together. Go out there and at Yahoo, CBS, ESPN. They're all very easy platforms to even form a league. But I do recommend that if you're brand new to fantasy baseball that you play first a year. Just play. Be a player, a general manager, and a manager before you assume something like a commissioner role. But that's just my suggestion. You can do whatever the hell you want to do. I served in the Army 21 fucking years, and you can do whatever you want because this country is still a free country. Hell yeah. You can't be a badass unless you're free. So let's be like a peacock, as what was that Mark Wahlberg said in The Other Guys. I need to fly like a peacock. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope in your late draft strategies as we near the opening season that this has helped you be a little bit more prepared and a little bit ready, more ready to relax and have fun at your draft. Because the more prepared you are, the more you're going to sit back. You're going to know who you want to draft. You're going to have plenty of targets spread throughout your tiers or your draft board so that you pick up players that you truly, truly want. And remember, it's not all about numbers out there, folks. It's okay to pick people that you like. Just make sure you don't overvalue them to the point where you really hurt your team throughout the year. But certainly go after those players that you like. The eye test is important. And if you love baseball like I do and love watching it, you want to include watching baseball and fantasy baseball, then you want players on your team that you like to watch, right? Am I right or wrong? Yeah. So please do. Let's have fun with fantasy baseball this year. Go to our website at www.badazzsports.com. Sign up for our podcast league that's going to be drafting a week from Sunday. Get on that league. Be a part of the podcast community. Follow me wherever you're at. Like me wherever you're at. Love me wherever you're at. And I'll love you back. ELE, baby. Everybody love everybody. That's Jackie Moon's words from Semi-Pro. If you didn't catch that movie, it's great. Anyway, this will conclude our special edition on drafting strategies. This is Rudy, the host of the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball podcast. Make sure you go out there and listen on your favorite platforms to all the fantasy baseball podcasts. They all make you a better player. And I look forward to you joining the community out there of badaasses, because you don't want to be a dumbass. You want to be a badass. And remember, if you suck, that's your fault. I'm out of here. Good night, everybody.